everyone. Welcome back to the CCO Follow podcast. Over this month, we are talking about Christians and politics. And we got to speak with Tad and Tony. And today we're actually speaking with Gabriel. And it's kind of an interesting conversation that I hope that we're going to have because Gabe was involved in the military. He enlisted and he served for 20 years. And so long time. And kind of the way that we think this works is I think politics drives a lot of enlistment and obviously serving a nation, the nation has to exist. And so there's questions that we have just regarding kind of our faith and how that interplays with military service and even just serving, working for the government. All those kind of things are wrapped up into this episode, hopefully. So Travis, what are we talking about when we mean that military and serving your country is in play with politics?
Well, I mean, I guess serving, like you're saying, where you're essentially paid by the government means you're part of the government. So we have a lot of people in our church who work for the state, even work on the federal level and things like that. But in some ways, service is honestly even more involved than in politics and affected by it than someone who just works for the state or the federal level, because they could get out at any time for the most part. Some of them might have, really small bouts, but in the military, you're signing for 4-year contracts at minimum, or is it sometimes?
It varies. So like your very first one, you commit to 8 years.
Okay.
And then after that, it kind of like you chunk it up after that.
But during that time, I mean, I'm sure you guys have exact phrases for this, but essentially you're owned by the government. Like you are.
Yeah, you sign some rights away, right?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah.
And
like you can't do certain things when you're, enlisted. You are essentially theirs on and off the clock, and that's very different. And so some people, and this is some of the things we'll talk about, but some people feel unethical maybe joining the military at certain times of our nation's history, or join the military for a different nation because they're like, well, I don't agree with it. And it's so much more involved than even just working for it, like you would in a state job or a federal job. And so it is really involved. And, that's an important thing to think about before you enter into being part of the military or people in the military, because it's all consuming. I mean, it's really part of that season of your life more than a normal job.
Yeah. So let's just jump right in. Tell us, why'd you join the military? What was your life like back then? Just the whole gamut. Let's run it.
Okay, so to start off, it's mid-90s. I really didn't. I got kicked out of high school. I literally had.
That's the story of a lot of people in the military, right?
I got kicked out of high school. I had a GED, and and I had a kid, my daughter, and I was working at 7-Eleven. And I legitimately was working minimum wage, and I was getting guns pulled on me. I was getting robbed.
Wow.
And kind of like had like little spats and whatnot. But bottom line is like at that point in time, like we were still in baby formula to feed my daughter.
Yeah. You were not a Christian at this point as well.
No.
Like just an important thing to note.
Right. I was.
Yeah.
Well, I was not really a follower of Jesus at this point in time.
Yeah.
So, we were still in baby formula. I couldn't make ends meet.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't have a college degree. I don't have a high school diploma. I had a GED, and I was like, well, how am I going to provide?
Yeah.
So, I actually feel kind of guilty when most people thank me for my service, because I didn't really do it for all of the
noble reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
I did it to fit a need of my family at that moment, and it was like completely selfish. It was nothing, and it wasn't until about the halfway mark when me and my wife were like trying to make the conscious decision: do we finish out this 10-year service?
Yeah.
Because at that point in time, I think I've deployed like 6 or 7 times, and it's like,
oh wow,
it's like there's no end in sight.
Yeah.
We don't know when. We're building up, and I'm going like,
well, because you said this was the 90s for you,
right?
And so this was really
a height. Yeah.
you were in when 9/11 happened.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, so I was actually in Germany, Hohenfels, Germany, doing a training mission,
Wow.
and they actually stopped all training after the planes hit because we thought,
We might be going somewhere.
right, because
Yeah.
because of our location, we were like, oh yeah, we're it, we're going to be the ones to go over there, and we didn't end up going, but I did end up eventually going several times. So,
Yeah.
What branch is this, and what was the process like of just how did you decide? What was kind of that first?
You chose the group with the least amount of marketing and said that's who I'll join.
No, actually, the funny thing is I actually wanted to be a Marine.
Yeah.
Which, at that point in time, it was during the Clinton administration, and the administration was doing a significant downsize of the military forces. Because they were doing a downsize of the forces, I only had legitimately a GED because I didn't graduate high school. I got kicked out, so I went and got a GED. And the Marine Corps was only taking one GED recipient a year.
Oh wow.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
Well, because they
Yeah. When you have a big pool, but
Right.
less need, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I went to the Marine Corps recruiter, and I weighed 117 pounds, and they're like, "Nah, dude. We're gonna take that guy who's 6'4", 200 pounds."
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm like,
Like,
"Oh."
I understand.
I'm like,
I
"Yeah."
would too.
Yeah, I was like, okay, man, this kicking rocks went across the hall and went over to the Army recruiter. So it wasn't really like I aspired to join the Army. It was, I actually wanted to be a Marine. The Marine Corps during that time just wasn't accepting a whole lot of GED applicants.
Yeah.
So you joined into the Army, and you said how many years were you in before you kind of made that decision?
It wasn't until, so I joined, it wasn't until 2005, 2006. It was 2006 because of the way that my enlistment window hit.
Sure.
That I had to make a decision either to finish out and do 20 or get off and get off the boat, so to speak.
So that's quite a few years
Yeah.
in the service, and you're obviously going from a kid to you're kind of becoming an adult now.
Yeah.
Right.
What was that time period like for you, and just your overall outlook on life and your worldview, if you can think back to that?
It didn't start off very, very well, honestly. I was self-absorbed and pretty much just I stole from a lot of moralities from the Christian worldview. Just kind of took from it. I was more
Take
agnostic.
what feels good.
Yeah. It felt good. It was but there was a lot that I didn't really fundamentally believe in the Christian worldview. I was like, oh, the Bible, it's whatever.
Yeah.
I had no fundamentals, and then I was just, I was just kind of following the flow, and there's so much of my military service, especially after the war started, that I was literally detached from society because I was so busy. Because I was deployed for 90 to 120 days at a time, and then about 240 days later, I was back again. So, and it was like that for most of my military service. They kind of
We're we talked to Arthur's dad back in November, and he mentioned his time in the military, different branch. I forgot what, I think Navy.
Well, actually, same, yeah.
Oh,
same
it wasn't
branch.
Army?
Yeah, he was
Oh, okay.
he was a Ranger. Yeah.
But he mentioned how during Thanksgiving and stuff like that, he always tried to build community, and he was a Christian in his unit and stuff like that, and he was always trying to witness to them and be with them in that way, be available to them in that way. Did you have anyone like that when you look back on your time? Because you weren't a Christian, you weren't following Jesus. Did you have anyone who you felt like was a light to you and maybe those around you?
I was actually, I'm
yes, and we made fun of him now.
I did. I was the guy who would totally pick on the people that were bearing light in the service.
But they were there and it mattered.
They were there, and I do look back and I see them standing up. Even though regardless of what I would say and what I would do.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would be not so kind and utilize my position or my rank and say things that would kind of like make it
Absolutely
corner.
Interesting.
It wasn't very kind. It wasn't, it was very hateful.
Yeah, honestly, I mean that shouldn't be surprising though. I mean, and to everyone, I mean, most people here in some way, shape, or form works with non-Christians. Hopefully, has friends who are non-Christian, stuff like that. Like, I mean, it talks about how the darkness hates the light because our deeds are evil, and it reveals it. And but it matters. Like that made a difference. That was part of your story and part of that long journey God had you on, and ultimately had us on as well as we come to know Him. And so I think that's cool that there was that God did put people in your life and those around you. And around, other non-Christians in that, in your group and stuff. And so it's just a good reminder for those who, I love the saying that like, we shouldn't be surprised when non-Christians sin, because like, that's what else they have. And so like, if there's a Gabriel in your life who's just being a jerk to you and you're trying to witness to him, so know that, one, they persecuted Jesus first, but two, you never know where that person's going to go and how Jesus is going to lead them, and you're part of their story.
Yeah.
Right.
And so as we kind of walk through this whole thing, not all the time, war in general it's not good. We don't like it.
Yeah.
And sometimes war happens because you're just protecting your land or whatnot. But oftentimes we see in history that war is political, and it can become political, and our political leaders make decisions, and it's very tough sometimes because not everybody agrees on those decisions. And so I'm curious for you, as you're in, you're not a Christian at this time, right. You're serving in the military, you've been in, you're seeing stuff, you're going through stuff. How are your thoughts politically at this point in time?
So there's a couple different things that stand out to me. So one of this is like just how our system actually works and it's supposed to work. So like, how many times have you actually contacted like one of your representatives?
None.
Okay. How many times have you contacted?
Once. They did diddly squat.
Yeah. I feel you on that. Yeah. But so like there's a point where even before I was a believer where I felt like, like that stewardship of the country was the people.
Yeah.
And
you're patriotic.
Right.
You care about the people. Totally.
Right. So it was kind of like that was kind of like developing. And then there was also that huge vacuum being detached from society. Why the war was going on, that kind of like, so like I kind of felt like the whole U.S. was moving this way.
Yeah.
And I'm like, detached from society pretty much.
It's almost like being in prison to a certain extent.
Right.
You get out and you're just like, this is not the same world I left.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like I was just like, all right, well, I get out, and then I'm like, wow, like what?
So like you're like being in there, you guys are going this direction, but then you get out and wait a minute, the rest of the United States is going in this direction.
Right.
Interesting.
Right. And you kind of like saw like super wave tops that were like big, like headline stuff, but you didn't really see like how that affected people's interactions with each other and whatnot. But, I really felt like the country was going like one way, and I was like, okay. And I get out and I'm like, they're not like, this is not what I was thinking. So
two totally different mindsets, two totally different expectations, and
right. And that was like,
and priorities.
Priorities and like expectations, and it's like and people's view on stewardship was really because I get out and you're working with people and they're like, well, thank you for your service, and you're like, okay. And then comes time to start talking about politics or religion, and they're like they want nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And it's like,
what am I even serving if not technically politics?
Yeah.
If not like it's our God, but it's like if you're in the service, that's what you're serving is politics. Like you're serving the nation. And so when people then are like, well, thank you for your service, but I don't want to talk anything regarding essentially what guides your service and what's leading your service and what controls your service, it is a little odd. It's kind of funny.
Well, not also did they not want to talk about it, but they didn't want to take any sort of like any of the responsibility on themselves.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, you know, you get all these people that would be like, well, I don't want to talk about politics. And then the next thing you know, they're wanting to talk about politics.
Yeah.
And
well,
then
in some ways, it's really no different than, I mean, a lot of people could never stomach seeing a cow be butchered.
Right.
But they're happy to grab the nicely packaged
McDonald's.
meat. Yeah. You know, we like not desensitizing ourselves. We like removing ourselves from the process and just getting the end result, and then pretending that the process either doesn't exist or that it can be behind this black curtain and that it'll just be safe to be over there where I don't see it. But honestly, that's where bad stuff happens. When you don't see the process, that's when things get thrown in. That's when problems happen, because all you get is the end result, and then the result keeps looking the same, but suddenly it's like, oh, you're putting stuff in the meat. Oh, you're doing this to the thing. Oh, you're doing that. And it's tainting the end results, but we've been chosenly blind to the process.
And hindsight's 2020, and we see, you know, from 2001 to when did we leave? It was 2020,
2022,
20,
2020, 2021.
So we actually didn't go into Afghanistan until
2002, 2003.
Well, it was really 2002, because we didn't jump in until October, but we actually didn't occupy like ground space until like early February of 2002. And then from that point we kind of
stayed.
Yeah, we stayed for a really long time.
Yeah, really long time.
Really long time.
So in that time, we see, and I know this is going to sound really political, and you know, I'll try to be as neutral as I can, but you know, we've seen where it went, and I think the reason why I'm asking is because for a lot of, you know, my friends and family who have been in, it seems like a lot of their mindset in the beginning was, I'm going into this thing because, you know, I want to protect our freedoms. I want
to participate.
I want to participate and serve, and it's very.
There's a lot of pride and a lot of like, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of pride for your country, pride for what good thing you're upholding. Yeah.
And then I see those same people who, you know, have said now, it's like over time, I started to realize what's actually being done here isn't helping at all. It's, you know, they've had how many different generals trying to lead and do all these different things. It's just not working. And so there's this, they kind of become cynical. And I'm curious for you what that was like, being, you know, someone who isn't a Christian, who didn't really come into it, just thought, I'm just serving, and then, oh, something happened here. What's, you know?
Well, I have two sides to that coin, actually. So like being there in the moment, like you really thought that you were doing something that was good.
Yeah.
And I was in part of a different unit that was, you know, I had more strategical, like, influence over the battle space in politics. Really, like we were in countries sometimes that we weren't necessarily there, but and we weren't allowed to talk about it, and probably
still shouldn't.
But you know, I'm not naming anything, but you know, there's
we'll just start naming countries.
No.
You wink when
no, I'm not going to do it. All right, still fall under the NDA for that one. So anyway, there was a lot that I saw, and then there was a lot that we were doing. But looking back on it now, and literally knowing the gospel and knowing the truth about Jesus, it's like you were trying to change people's hearts without the person that can change their hearts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it's really
legislating morality. We talked about that a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of funny, because you know they kind of like use like a blotter. And it's a strategic like terminology. So like all the different combat outstations were literally spaced out to try to influence that region. But you really can't influence the region if you don't change the hearts and minds. And how do you win the hearts and minds?
Yeah.
Like, how do you really change somebody's hearts and minds?
You certainly don't do it by just having a clump of guys with guns spaced out. If anything,
occupying a land that they
should be in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, that changes their not their minds. It just changes their behaviors until your back is turned, and then they stab you in the back.
Right.
So what I'm getting from this is that it seems like the reason really to make the world a better place. Obviously stamping out terrorism. Terrorism is not good, right? Mm-hmm. But it seems like these reasons are good, but the actual follow through maybe wasn't the best, or wasn't really, at least in our understanding, going to work at all. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is when you, and Travis, maybe you can answer this too, but is there a biblically centered, Christ-centered reason to be involved and serve in military and serve in government and just general as a whole? And then what does that look like? How far does that go? That's kind of the question that I have, is like, should we be serving in this system? Should we just be voting? And where are we supposed to be here?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it? Coming from, you weren't a Christian and then you got out and you realized your life changed, you accepted Christ.
Yeah, would you do it again if you were a Christian?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I would, but I probably would not do a full 20. I would do it because and I think it's not any different. Talking to another pastor here, and just talking about some of the friends and close connections that he has from people that he served with, because it's still serving.
Yeah.
And you still make those people connections. And I still love those people dearly. Like they're, we've dug holes in the middle of 112 degree weather and stuff like that. Dumb stuff, but stuff that over time those
you bonded with them.
You bond over hardship and tragedy. It's absolutely true.
Yeah, and then I wouldn't not go in, but I would not probably do 20 if I had to. Just as a believer, I wouldn't do 20. And the irony is that the guy who I used to ride the most, he didn't do 20.
Yeah.
He literally did, I think he did 9 and he got out. I was like, what are you doing getting out? And this is the same guy I would berate.
Yeah.
And just kind of jest and jab at him constantly. But yet at the same time, I didn't want to see him go.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, it's just not really for me, man.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm going to get out. He's like,
Yeah.
there's something more than just this little snapshot of my life. He's like, it was great, but I'm done.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think ultimately, biblically, it's one of those things that's never said explicitly good or bad. We see plenty of, David in the Old Testament was essentially a military general made king. And, we see plenty of examples that God essentially says that he puts, we have the family, the community, and government, and that he puts government there for purpose. And so I think that being said, I think that is enough of a reason to say, if it's within your conscience, it's perfectly fine to work within government. Now that's where it comes to rub, though, is within your conscience. There's plenty of stories of guys who have been enlisted, whether because of choice or because of requirements and things like that, who were like, yeah, I can be part of this up until shooting a gun. And there's been stories of Christians who did not have that conscience, who refused to shoot guns, and at first they're completely mocked by their group, and obviously their group's upset at them because they're like, you're not gonna get my back, I'm having to get yours and carry your weight and stuff like that. But then proving themselves to be like, no, I'm not. It's not about not sacrificing myself and going out and being the first to sacrifice themselves or the first to go out to get someone who's fallen. Yet they're like, I don't have the conscience for this. So I think just literally every other decision in life, you have to weigh, where's my conscience lie on the vastness of decisions involved, not just simply do I enlist or not, but the million of micro decisions and pieces of what it means to participate in that. And if you don't have the conscience for it, then you shouldn't do it. Ultimately we stand before God, and regardless of who's telling us to do something, if you cannot stand before God and say, I did this believing it was okay, if you can't at least do that, you should not do that. But yeah, absolutely. I think there's, I think especially you can say what you want about our country, but currently our country is not trying to invade and take over other countries. I think that would be much harder for an average Christian to have a conscience to be part of a military that was actively trying to take over another country. That's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes people label our country and go, there's so many bad things. How could you have the conscience for this? And it's like, there are a lot of bad things. But when you consider what most of the branches of our military do, most of them are not doing really egregious things. That comes from a layman. And I'm sure there's a lot of egregious things.
Yeah, and there's two sides to every coin. Yeah. And we can only act within the information that we have and the information we're given. And I think
then the opportunity we're given in the moment.
Exactly.
Like if you join it and then, the blindfold's off and you see that X, Y, and Z is happening and you're like, this isn't to my conscience, that's an opportunity to be a light, to be like, I signed up for this. Yes, I technically have to obey you, but technically I don't. Like technically I can choose first and foremost God to be God. But you do have to just weigh those decisions just like we do literally every single day.
Yeah.
We had a really high profile guy who joined my unit that went in with the utmost honorable reasons. He wasn't really a believer, not that I can tell. And he joined, and it was like pretty big news. And he joined and he served, and then we go into Iraq, and he was literally he'd have like these groups of people like sitting around him in Iraq, and they were just like leaning up against the side of a building that's got blown up and everything, and we're just like sitting there with like a little micro cup of coffee, sitting there talking about why are we actually here in Iraq.
Yeah.
And he didn't feel like we had to be there in Iraq, and there's
a discussion,
right?
I mean, that's why you guys were even discussing it, is because it wasn't entirely clear.
Yeah.
Well, we got told one thing, and then
you see another,
Yeah. But I mean, it
doesn't
also
mean it's right or wrong, but it means clearly there's room for discussion. There's some gray.
Right, and the same thing was true about Afghanistan, because like the whole nation, like it was like, well, we just had these planes hit.
Yeah.
Let's go over there and do something. And we get over there and like,
what are we gonna do?
What are we doing?
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, well, we're here.
But
what are we doing?
Yeah, totally.
And then it wasn't until like a few years later that people were like, well, we need to win the hearts and minds and establish and help them. And it was like, when we first got over there, it was just like, you're sitting there staring out.
I thought you had a plan.
Right. It's like you didn't have a plan?
It almost seems like, because when I hear like win the hearts and minds, it's, I've seen a lot of documentaries and stuff, and they talk about that stuff. I mean, I can't help but think about like the Crusades in a way, where it's kind of like whatever winning looks like of the hearts and minds, whatever mindset that they want to put in place, whether that's, it might not be 100% Christian, whatever, but it's the same kind of aspect of like this idea of what the Crusades were, is like, we're going to go and make everybody believe this one thing. And I think, I don't know. I don't
think it was the same. I don't think it was the same. I don't think that we went over there with the intent to make people believe one thing.
You went over there because we just had a disaster on our soil.
Sure.
So, hey, these people did it. We should go over there. But then you get there and say, well, what's actually the right move now that we're here?
Right.
Like we're going to the bully, not saying the entire country, but the individuals of the country who essentially were trying to bully. Okay, we're here. But now what? And you have to figure out what is what. And
then you have to go back even a little bit further into the history of Afghanistan and think about the proxy war that led to the situation.
Yeah, how did we even get here? Yeah.
How did we even get to the point where those bad guys were allowed to hang out in Afghanistan?
Yeah.
And you see the direct reflection of just flash in the pan politics.
Yeah.
Because it was like, okay, well, Russia's here. So, and we actually trained the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen are the same people who basically trained Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
So here we're training the Mujahideen to fight the Russians because the Russians are bad guys. And then Russia leaves, and then we just kind of like don't do anything to help them.
Well, and it doesn't help also with the way our system's naturally set up. You have a different president every few years because, I was watching this summary of this old war, and the way they handled it when they were merging two of their armies together is that they would actually have the leaders of each army alternate daily. Of like, okay, you're in charge for the day. Now you're in charge for the day, and it led to complete chaos with
how does that
their
work
armies
at all?
And obviously, it's not the same. It's not the same time frame, but every 4 years, and in some ways, the joke is we have 3 years of a president, and then 1 year of all the stuff happening, then 3 years of a president. So I'm sure it's hard to get true direction, but it's kind of like, the situation you found yourself there makes me think akin of like if someone, if some kid bullied your kid, and then you go over to their house all upset, but then you get there and you're like, what am I supposed to do now? Like you're upset and you're like, well, I'm there now, but then it's possibly more complicated. First, you're just upset at this kid, and then like you said about looking in the history of what started it, you're like, oh, their dad's abusive, and now so he's bullying my kid. I mean, it sounds like it just got more complicated the second you got there.
Yes.
That everyone was like, let's get there, and you're like, yeah. Then you got there and you're like, oh, but now what? Like
It was.
we can't just literally explode this whole country. Oh, what actually started this? Oh, okay. How did this actually factor in? How do we like ultimately long-term change this instead of just beating up on the kid who beat up on our kid? Like
Right.
it feels like that's,
Right. We try to change the people and their thought process without giving them any real reason to
do so.
Yeah. It was like it was difficult and a hard pill to swallow. But I don't really agree on the presidential.
You don't think that influences it?
I think it influences it, but I think that the president really doesn't have as much authority as he does. Because I mean, the way it's supposed to work.
Well, yeah.
With the three branches of the government,
Yeah.
I don't think, and a lot of people,
They're not the one declaring war. They're not the one,
right? Because
directly telling the army what to do.
Congress has to vote
Yeah.
to do it, and it's not like, and that's where your representation comes into play, and how often do you actually voice? Because like, I mean, it's about politics. It's like, well, how do you influence politics? It's like, well, if you're not letting your
this is where it meets.
Right.
It's like it's hard to be a complainer when you're not actively trying
To
do
participate.
something about it and participate. You said that you had that you've thought about this often. What were some of those thoughts that you had?
Well, a lot of it has just been like, how do I reconcile like what I did and didn't do, and most of it is just trying to like, well, why go through all this to get to here and then come to the Lord, and like, what was God doing through all that that He's now going to use? And I look at a lot of the things that I got indoctrinated into, being in the military and just being a part of the team, and I see how I can use it for other things within the body of Christ. So I'm always like looking like, well, why did I do all that? Because God knew when I was going to truly come to a saving faith in Him, but yet I went through all that stuff before that point, and it's like, why? Well, part of it is me being stubborn, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, God is good. Nothing's wasted.
Right.
Many military guys I know, and I think you're a prime example of this, you have a very much attitude of, well, I'm just going to figure it out then. And I think one of the greatest skills that people in the military come out of is not hard skills, but soft skills of, of endurance, of perseverance, critical thinking of just, I have to make this work, so I'm going to make it work. So I don't know. God, I mean, we could always ask why this, and, why this combo, or why this long, why did He let me, quote unquote, waste this many years? But ultimately we trust that just nothing's wasted, and the years that the locusts have eaten will be restored.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is one of the greatest arguments in favor of what Tad was saying, basically, of loving your neighbor, and that's why we should get involved. We had a conversation when we first kind of met, and you were like, it was election cycle, and you were like, are you voting? And I'm like, I don't know how I feel about it right now. And you kind of just let me know, is like, what you're saying right now is that you can't help anyone if you're not participating in something. And so I think it's a really good example of like why it is important to participate and use the voice that we have. If you're in a country that isn't, like, obviously you can't get involved.
To anything,
but we're in a country that allows us, our politics allow us to participate in, as Tad was saying in his teaching and in that earlier podcast of like this, it directly can result in helping your neighbor. Or if you stand back, I don't see that the word or God is telling us at all to just don't do anything.
Right.
Let it all happen. That's not how I see it.
Well, and even if you do believe that you should be more hands off for whatever reason, Timothy makes it very, or Paul to Timothy makes it very clear. You should pray for those in leadership. You should pray for those above you in different authority roles, and that includes, the military. That includes the people who make decisions of where the military goes and how the military functions. And for all those who, I'm sure honestly our church doesn't need this reminder just because we have so many people who are in military, used to be in military, but every single person in military is a person. Right. Like every single one of them, God cares about, God sees, God's pursuing. And for us to just brush off entire swaths of people like that is not God's heart.
Yeah. And I do. I mean, I come from a family who has served and who continues to serve. And I think where I feel with it is like what you were saying earlier is I think there's a difference between, knowingly doing something not good and then protecting and going to for others, like for the greater thing of others. I think what I'm trying to say is like, I think it's, if you are involved in just working for the state or working in government, whatever that is for you, whether it's serving in the military, being able to ask yourself, what am I doing here? Am I helping my neighbor? Am I participating and protecting freedoms of, religion and whatnot? Yeah. If that's the case, like, and your conscience is clear, like that's good. That's I think it's a noble thing to do in certain aspects. But if you ask yourself, let's just say you're involved in something and you become a Christian or whatever happens, you realize, well, this department I don't really believe this department is doing good. And I don't really follow through with this particular department, then it's okay to kind of leave that.
I disagree about that.
Okay.
Because I feel, and this is just me, I feel like if you are in that position and your heart is led by prayerful and scripture, and you're like, well, this is wrong, I think that you have the responsibility to shine a little bit of light on it and kind of like,
right.
Because if I was just following what was, and I think that we're very comfortable just being comfortable. We're not comfortable being uncomfortable. And there's an aspect of like, well, if I'm going to be the guy rocking the boat about what this department is doing, like, you have to be the light in that situation.
Yeah. What I mean more so is like, if there's a specific department just dedicated to, I guess like if there was ever, I don't know of an example right off the top of my head, but if there was ever, let's say like a Planned Parenthood type department that specifically funds and does that stuff. Let's say you weren't a Christian, you got involved, maybe you've spent your whole career there, and then you get saved or whatever happens. That's where I'm talking. It's where it's if there's specific structures that just weren't good, that we don't believe in, then that's where it's, I guess that's where I'm trying to say. But absolutely, if there's just like our government, like I think there's people, hasn't there been people who have served, like been politicians in this church? Probably. And there probably is.
Well, and I know there's some who currently run for things.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where you're saying is like, let's be the light in that aspect.
Yeah. Well, and like Tad mentioned, politics is oftentimes associated with dirty things, partially because it's literally a nature of compromise.
Yeah.
And so, and it's not good or bad. Like Scripture is very clear about having a conscience that allows or a conscience that doesn't allow is not an ethically good or bad thing. It doesn't make you a better person or a worse person. Yep. It's just simply this is where your conscience is. And I think one of the best examples we have of the New Testament of Paul describing allowing your conscience is the sacrifice, the meat sacrificed to idols. And I think that's why it's such a great example is that sometimes people just go, oh, well, they have the conscience to eat it or not eat it. But it goes even further than that because they have the conscience to even buy it. Because those who didn't have the conscience to eat the meat sacrificed to idols, they honestly could make a good case. I mean, it's the same case that a lot of Christians make when talking about Target or Disney or other things. They're like, well, I can't give my money to someone where it's supporting this thing. Well, those who had the conscience to eat meat sacrificed to idols, they were essentially supporting the idol temples by giving them money in exchange for the meat that was sacrificed in their temples. And so you can absolutely make a case, someone who wouldn't have a conscience could absolutely make a case that sounds very like you're literally supporting this. But Paul made very clear that both those people living within their conscience is perfectly fine in this context. And so I think it's very safe to say that there's plenty of things that are black and white. So many things are black and white.
Yeah.
But the conscience gray area is way bigger than sometimes we appreciate.
Totally.
Yeah, I just think that there's a little bit different within the American society, just in general, because like I feel like we have a part of that authority, that God granted authority,
Absolutely.
just by being Americans.
Yeah, because we get to vote, because
Right.
we get a certain. I mean, not just we get to vote. There's a lot of countries that get to vote, but essentially the way our system is set up. Like we talked about this on Tad's episode, that you are one small fraction of the entire government is
Correct.
how our government is laid out, supposed to be laid out.
Yeah.
And so, so it is a very different situation. And honestly, it makes decisions harder, but all the more it makes them not black and white. It makes that grayer area even greater.
Yes.
And
Well,
so
like any one of us could potentially be president of the United States.
hey, who are we going to vote for? Are we
there's
going to vote
that
for Gabriel
freedom.
this year? That's.
I'll write your name in.
Well, thank you.
But yeah,
I don't think we're old enough.
No, you have to be 36. Yeah, so you got
Vote for
some years.
Gabriel.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
default, I win.
yeah. But it's
kinda like the other candidates this year.
Yeah, I definitely think like the conversations that we had were valuable in just kind of bridging, like going into the space of the gray area.
Yeah.
What we're talking about, and it to me, what stands out is that word intentionality. Be intentional with whatever you do, and
Yeah.
and your conscience is, we ultimately, God is who we answer to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
When I think sometimes we also, with that gray area of conscience, someone might say, well, I don't have the conscience to join the military and do this and this and this. Okay, that's fair. That's
Yeah.
great. We don't want you to go against your conscience, but sometimes we can, when we don't have the conscience for something, we can then act as if it's a free pass to do nothing. And at very bare minimum, like, even if you don't have the conscience to vote, I mean, if you for some reason you're just like, oh, my conscience is just it's so weak for this. Okay, well, God makes it very clear that you should be praying.
yeah.
God makes it very clear that you have brothers and sisters, even with their own church, who have the conscience to be part of politics, who have the conscience to be part of the military, different stuff like that. How are you supporting them? How are you
Yeah.
loving them? How are you? Because
That's good.
regardless of your conscience of politics or military or anything else, you have other Christians who have that conscience, and you should be lovingly supporting them and encouraging them to be salt and light in those areas, even though you don't have the conscience to be in those areas yourself.
Yeah.
And I say bare minimum praying, that honestly, that's the default and the best thing anyone could do. And so
Yeah.
it's not even like you're picking up, well, this is the last thing you could do. It's like, hey, you should be doing this regardless, and following your conscience on the other things.
Yeah, and honestly, it's fixing kind of how we say fix your desires, but it's fixing our hearts on the right thing.
Right.
Like you can support your troops out of an evil heart, but you can support the troops out of
A good
a
heart.
good heart.
Yeah.
And so it's like no matter what you're doing or where you're at, it's kind of being intentional about doing it in the right ways or in the right mindset.
Yeah.
There's so many things like Pastor John always uses the example of like evangelizing, and he's like, I could be very evangelistic about burritos, and it's like, and he brings that example a lot. But it's true. It's like I could be so excited about this specific thing that may be good. You know what I mean? It may be like a good thing, but if my heart isn't attached to the root of it, the reason, like God and
Yes.
serving the kingdom of God and loving one another and all these things, then it's wasted. you know? And so I definitely think that's where I'm at, is in my life, in my worldview, I guess you could say, is I think I'm not afraid to say that I'm proud to be an American.
We're at least, sorry.
And I'm not afraid to say I support our troops, but I say that with the heart and mindset of, I believe that this freedom is good to love one another, and we live in a country that is not, you know, I think there's corruption everywhere, and certainly there's corruption in our politics, but this is a country where I feel like I can do something about it. And so I'm proud to be able to participate and do something about that. And I'm proud in the men and women who serve to keep those freedoms a reality. And so, but yeah, there's, again, hindsight's 2020. We only can interact with the information we have, and there might not always be, like, I certainly don't believe our military is perfect. And I think there's a lot of things that should change and could change. But at the same time, it doesn't mean I'm going to pull back 100% of my support in that. Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does, but I'm just for me though, it's I kind of feel like the prayer is a necessity, because I mean that's like
Everyone should be doing, all Christians should do that all the time, regardless of anything.
right, regardless of. You need to be like, well, I don't know what to pray about. Well, you can tell God that, hey, I just don't know what to pray about, but I know that this is an issue that's weighing in on my heart.
Yeah.
I think that fundamentally is a thing, but I also think that, like, not making it a decision is allowing other people's decision to have more weight.
Yeah.
So it's just like, you know, these people who, and I've heard this, and it's like nails on a chalkboard for me. They're like, well, I don't vote because it doesn't really matter anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, you say that, but I mean,
like, I don't know about this last election, but I know in previous elections, it's been like there's been more people not voting than people who voted for either, because we do live in a two-party country, either party, which is, like you're saying, when you don't take what's offered to you to participate, then you're giving others a greater weight.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just feel like that's kind of like
responsibility.
Yeah, it's like, you know, these are the same people that are refusing not to vote, that are like, hey, so how was it being 20 years in the Army? It's like, well, did you vote?
Yeah.
Because that's the whole reason why I did it. Because when I was doing it, it was completely secular for this world and this world system. And now I kind of have a different view on it, but you know, it's still good, and I have a view on it like, well, that was this world and this world system, but I also feel like more.
This is the system God has put us in, so we should do the best that we can with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's like
This is the system God has allowed for us to be placed in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, if you were born in a different country, then do the best with the situation you have as well, and honor God in it, and do what, you know, essentially Jesus would do. You know, the example we have of Jesus on earth is being under essentially a dictatorship, and being a conquered country within, you know, this greater area of Rome. And we got to see his philosophy on it, and we got to see how he interacted with government. We got to see all these different things. But he would act differently under different government styles, not because Jesus is different, but because the situation is different. It's no differently than how he treated both Pharisees and tax collectors and prostitutes with the same love and love for them.
Yeah.
But he also treated them differently because they needed different things for him to essentially be showing his love for them, rebuking those who were in high religious authority and giving grace to those who were already beaten down, and, you know, but preaching the gospel to both. And, you know, under Rome, he'd act differently than under the U.S. He'd act differently than if he was in Russia, act differently than if he was, you know, in Germany. Different governments leading to different actions because of what is needed and how to reflect the heart of God. And so we ought to say, this is where God's put me. How do I best love and serve those around me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I mean, you see Daniel, and because that was the very first book that John was going through when I first started going here. So, and it was just kind of like, it was a really nice snapshot. Kind of like, how do you act within a system that maybe you don't agree with.
Yeah, literally captured and brought into.
Right.
He wasn't even
Yeah.
raised in it.
Well, and he had a huge influence in it. So that's helpful and when we're thinking about this to understand.
Yeah, and that happens over and over again in Scripture, like Joseph, like where they didn't ask for influence, but God gave it to them, and so then they used whatever was in their hand.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
I love talking with you, and it's nice to have these conversations because it helps us get to know each other better, but it also helps explore the gray area in certain things. And so thank you so much for joining with us today and listening in. How many? We have one more Christian and Politics episode.
Yeah.
So stay with us, and we hope to see you next time. As always, God bless.